Back in March, Krista, John Holmes, and I got together and said, wouldn't it be cool to do something related to the 250th anniversary of the United States of America? This was in March. Keep in mind, think of the calendar in your head. And John said, I've got something to do, like a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution, but if we did it in 3 parts, did part 1 in July, and part 2 in August, and part 3 in September, and just space them out so nobody's too burdened, wouldn't that be cool? And I said, well, I can do August, never thinking in a million years that August would actually get here. And here we are. So last 48 hours have been pretty harrowing for me putting this together. So a couple more housekeeping notes. I've never done this presentation before, and so I don't know if this will go 30 minutes or 3 hours and 30 minutes. I just don't know. So if you need to get up and leave, that does not hurt my feelings at all. It's not insulting at all. Also, as I said, come get more food because there's a lot of food that's still up here. When John was here in July, I told this story about what this was going to be a preface to say that we're not talking about anybody who's ever been on currency or a coin or a stamp. And the stamp thing is not true. So some of these people have actually been on stamps, but you probably have never seen the stamps. So I wanted to focus on the founders, founding mothers, and founding fathers of the United States of America who have kind of disappeared in history. And you're going to see there's some pretty incredible stories in this series of 24 founders of the United States of America. And I started off by telling the story about in July about Paul Revere, and he's famous because of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem about the midnight ride of Paul Revere. And I'm going to read just the first stanza. Oh, by the way, you probably have heard the poem, but if you ever go online to print it out, it's 5 pages. I had no idea. So listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Hear the sing-song you hear in Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friends, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light, one if by land and two if by sea. We all remember this, right? And I on the opposite shore will be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. And it goes on and on and on and on. And so my challenge in July was the guy who really did a lot. There was a guy and a gal, a 14-year-old girl, and we're going to talk about her. The guy who really did a lot was a guy by the name of William Dawes. And if you were here in July, I challenged everybody, so go home and write a poem about William Dawes. So I thought, I just threw that challenge out there. I can't not do this. So AI helped me on this, and then Donna perfected it. Donna put a lot of work. So I'm going to read to you the combination poem by AI. Claude is the artificial intelligence unit I use, and Donna Pauley, called The Midnight Ride of William Dawes. And it's a humble corrective with apologies to Mr. Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the other guy, not Paul Revere, who rode that night through mud and squalls while the North Church watched with its listening walls. Revere got lanterns, one if by land, 2 if by sea. So the tale is planned. But Dawes got nothing, no signal, no light, just a horse named Claude and a very bad night. So Claude, the AI, put his own name in here, by the way. Interesting. He galloped out by Boston Neck, past a sentry post, a genuine wreck, talked his way through with a wink and a nod while Revere got glory and Dawes got robbed. He rattled through farmyards, he clattered through halls, he passed by a cobblestone of old women's shawls. The British are coming, he strove to proclaim, but his voice crackled noticeably under the strain. A dog barked back with far better flair, and a rooster outshouted him right then and right there. He thought he heard hoofbeats, friend or foe. Nay, just rat claws on the cobblestones below, scratching and scritching in the pale moonlight. He fell off his horse near Lexington Well, got tangled in reins, and there's a story to tell. And by the time Dawes walked back with the limping gait, the battle was already sealed by fate. So here's to William Dawes, forgotten and plain, who rode just as hard in the very same rain. But rhymes not with shall hear or shining career, which is why children, they picked Paul Revere. So that, I put in several prompts into Claude. That took 4 seconds to come up with this poem. 4 seconds. Now, Donna edited, because there was some things that didn't sing-songy, she edited 4 seconds with artificial intelligence. And it picked up a number of factual things. He actually made it all the way to Lexington to warn everybody, and he fell off his horse. He got tangled in the reins, was slightly injured, and it put that in there. I didn't know that. And the horse took off. He had to walk all the way back to Boston. It took him a day and a half to walk back to Boston. So he arguably was the more famous candidate for Longfellow's poem, but Dawes doesn't rhyme with a lot of things other than claws and shaws and things and walls, things of that sort. So let's get started. You're going to have a lot of questions. Can everybody hear okay? Is my inside voice working okay? Okay. You're going to have a lot of questions, and I really don't have a lot of answers to them, but bear with me. Bear with me, and let's see if we can get this going here. All right. So, this is about the forgotten founders. These are the inputs that I used to try and identify who we wanted to talk about and topics we want to talk about. Folklore and myth, and that's where I want to spend a lot of time, because there's a lot of really interesting details in there. And then contradictions and things that survive today. The overlooked patriots. So let's start off with Gouverneur Morris. Governor in the 18th and 19th century was a somewhat, not a common name, but it was not uncommon. I think if you named your child governor today, people would raise an eyebrow or two at you. But there are a number of famous Americans. There's a Governor K. Warren, who was a Gettysburg hero. So there are a lot of governors. And I'll challenge you to follow along if you want. Oh, here's what we're going to do at the end of this. You get 2 votes. You get 2 votes, and you're going to vote twice for your favorite patriot, and then we're going to see which patriots are our famous of the ones that are our favorites of the ones we don't know. So as you listen, pay attention and come up with your favorites. Gouverneur Morris. He authored the Constitution's final draft, and he's the one that came up with the words, "We the people." He lost his, this is interesting, he lost his leg in a carriage accident at age 28. Rumors swirled that it happened while he was fleeing a jealous husband. So maybe there's a little justice in that, I don't know. Decades after signing the Declaration of Independence, get ready for this, in agony from a urinary blockage, he tried to clear it himself with a piece of whalebone from a corset and botched the attempt that caused infection that he ultimately died from. Yeah. He was the only foreign diplomat who stayed in Paris through the worst of the reign of terror during the French Revolution, and he used bribes at his diplomatic standing to smuggle and threatened aristocrats out of France, but he stuck around during the reign of terror. John Dickinson, he was a devout Quaker. He was a pacifist, and his convictions to pacifism led him to abstain from signing the Declaration of Independence. So though he refused to sign the Declaration of Independence, he voluntarily enlisted as a private to fight, which again was against Quaker teachings, of course, for a cause that he formerly never endorsed. Despite he was opposed to independence. He did not want to go to war against the British. He personally freed enslaved people on his plantation, and these freedoms happened between 1776 and 1786, and he's the only founder to fully emancipate his own enslaved workforce during the Revolutionary War. He's the only founder that let them all go. Now, not all of them owned slaves. Many, and maybe most owned slaves. Benjamin Franklin owned a slave. I don't know if you knew that or not. But zip it, lock it. We're not talking about Benjamin Franklin. He's on a $100 bill. But he's the only founder that freed all of his slaves. George Mason refused to sign the Constitution. There's 2 documents. There's the Declaration of Independence at 1776, and the Constitution in, where's John when I need him, 1788, I think. So 10 years later, maybe it's not. It's 88. But he's the only. So who are we on? We're on Mason. He refused to sign the Constitution because it lacked the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights was not attached to the Constitution when the Constitution was developed. and failed to abolish because it failed to abolish slavery. He was a staunch anti-slavery guy, and he refused to sign the Constitution. His refusal to sign reportedly wounded his friends and fellow buddy Virginian George Washington, who felt personally betrayed by the man who had helped him shape so much of the document. So he was heavily involved in writing the Constitution. He ultimately became the father of the Bill of Rights, but he and George Washington lost their friendship because he would not sign the Constitution. George Mason University in Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., is named for him. Roger Sherman, the old Puritan. We all on Roger Sherman now? Okay. He's the only founder to sign all four major founding documents: the Articles of Association, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. So the reason the Constitution came together was because the Articles of Confederation were not working. They just weren't working. And they assembled all these delegates in Philadelphia to author the Constitution. Oh, actually, they assembled all these delegates in Philadelphia to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, and they ultimately went rogue and wrote the Constitution. They closed the doors, sealed the windows in July in Philadelphia. It was apparently hotter than hot, and they all signed an agreement, non-disclosure agreement, that they wouldn't talk about it. So they really went rogue when they wrote the Constitution. This was not supposed to have happened, and went rogue when they did the Constitution. So Sherman brokered the Great Compromise, giving states equal Senate representation and proportional House seats. So the House is done based on population, where the Senate, you get 2 seats per state, and that was a big, big deal. And it was really driven by the Southerners, who were big property owners, but they didn't have a big population. And the Northerners wanted it based on popular vote because that would have given them more power. If that had not happened, the Constitution would have collapsed, and who knows what would have happened. So Sherman initially, we're on Sherman, right? Sherman initially opposed making George Washington the commander-in-chief. He was favoring a New York general instead, and it may have been Nathaniel Greene, although I'm not sure about that. But ultimately, he joined to give a unanimous vote to Washington, because as with the Constitution passing, so having Washington with a unanimous vote was critically important to have the support of the people. So remember, you're going to get 2 votes, so pay attention. Let's see who wins this. James Wilson. So I know a little bit about James Wilson. So James Wilson was born in Scotland from a very poor family, arguably a dirt poor family. They lived in a sod house with a dirt floor. He was a shepherd. They raised sheep. He was a shepherd. But in Scotland, in the 1750s, 40s, 50s, they had public schools, which was unheard of anywhere else in the world. And he was particularly bright, although he was particularly poor. He got a scholarship to attend what I believe ultimately became the University of Edinburgh. Was really, really smart. He had a cousin or a brother who had come to America. He did not come to the United States because that did not exist at that time. Who came to America, who sponsored him to come over. He was so smart that he wanted to intern under a lawyer in New England. I don't know whether it was Boston or Philadelphia, but you had to pay to be an intern. And so the cousin or brother gave him a house, and this is the start of the story, gave him a house to live in, and Wilson sold the house for 4 times its value when the brother gave it to him in like 2 or 3 years later, which got him into land speculation. So I'm going to go back to my notes on this page. So despite being one of 6 Supreme Court justices, he died penniless, hiding and fleeing his creditors. So he became wildly wealthy. He was the largest landowner. Keep in mind, he was a shepherd boy in Scotland before he came over here. He was the largest landowner in America through speculation, and very well may have owned the land that we are in right now, stretching across Indian territories. He speculated. Keep in mind, the Indians were here in 1770s and 80s, but he was a wild land speculator. He died penniless. He had gone to prison twice, debtor's prison twice. He was released once, and I think he escaped once. And his second wife, his first wife died. His second wife They ran ultimately on the coast of North Carolina and were hiding in a tavern when he ultimately died because his creditors were chasing him. So he went from one of the wealthiest men in America, dying penniless in a tavern, in a room in a tavern. His push for popular election, he wanted popular election of the president, which we do not have. It's electoral college. His push for a popular election of the president struck other delegates as close to tyranny, other delegates meaning Southern delegates. So his failed proposal helped produce the electoral college, which is he developed that idea, which he is now famous for. He was also the architect of the notorious 3/5 compromise. Does anybody know what the 3/5 compromise was? So the 3/5 compromise, Dave, you want to tell us? You want me to take it?
How you counted the population and whether or not it included the slaves.
Right.
And they were never counted as a full
person. Yeah, so the 3/5 compromise, the southern slave owners, and oh, by the way, there were northern slave owners at this point in time, but the southern slave owners wanted to count the slaves for the purposes of elected congressmen and senators. At that time, it ultimately changed. And so Wilson came up, which he was highly opposed to. So he was a anti-slavery, huge anti-slavery, but he did own a slave at one point in his life. So he came up with the 3/5 compromise that said a slave counts as 3/5 of a person, and that balanced out the count to elect congressmen. So when Benjamin Franklin, at the very end, when the Constitution was being drafted, Franklin must have been in his 90s when the Constitution was being drafted, very old. He was unable to talk. So when Franklin was too frail to read his own closing remarks, Wilson read those closing remarks for him. Wilson really is the guy who drafted the Constitution. He was considered brilliant, but his ego got in the way, and he wanted Washington to name him. He campaigned to have Washington name him the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And Washington, because of his hubris, would not allow it. He named him a Justice of the Supreme Court, but not the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. John Jay ultimately got that, as we'll soon see. And so Wilson was considered probably the most legal, brilliant mind in America, but died in failure and into oblivion. Edmund Randolph, who was first Attorney General of the United States, introduced the Virginia Plan at the Constitutional Convention. Again, Declaration of Independence, 1776, Constitution 10 or 15 years later, which was the framework for the three-branch national government. So when they went in to draft the Constitution, it was not the three branches that it is today. I mean, they went in with a blank slate. Keep in mind, they weren't supposed to be drafting the Constitution. They were there to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, which were not working at the time. And so that ultimately became the Virginia Plan ultimately became the foundation for the Constitution. He refused to sign the Constitution that he helped create, fearing it gave too much power to the federal government, then reversed course. So it had to go to each of the, I think it might have been 14 states at that time. Maybe Kentucky had come in at that time, and maybe it was 15. But he actually, although he would not sign the Constitution because he felt it gave the federal government too much power, he actually went state to state and campaigned for the approval of each state. He later served as Secretary of State, but he resigned in disgrace in 1795 after being accused on, by the way, shaky evidence of leaking secrets to the French. Nobody knows whether he really did that. He ultimately resigned because he just didn't want to go through the torment of public prosecution. Edmund Randolph and George Mason together stood as two of the only three delegates who refused to sign the Constitution that they actually helped write. Keep in mind, writing the Constitution happened over the course of 3 or 4 months. It was done in secret. It was a wink, wink, nod, nod. When they went in there, they did not know that they were going to be writing the Constitution, but kind of evolved from figuring out that rewriting the Articles of Confederation, it was going to be a losing prospect. And so then the idea of a Constitution came up. Here's an interesting one. Mercy Otis Warren, an author. She published satirical plays and political pamphlets that rallied colonists against the British. One of the most influential political voices of the Revolution of all, male or female. Her 1788 pamphlet opposing the Constitution was so powerful, it was wrongly attributed to Eldridge Gerry, who we're going to talk about in a second, which is actually pronounced Gary, and we're going to talk about what that's important in a second. Over a century, no one believed that a woman could write with such force. Later in life, get this, later in life, she asked her old friend John Adams to publicly certify in writing inside the library's copy that she, not a man, had written her most famous play after it had been misattributed for decades, actually. So Mary Otis Warren. Here's another interesting cat. Phyllis Wheatley, first published African-American poet, and her 1773 book proved to skeptics worldwide that enslaved people possess the same intellectual capacity as anyone. Had to defend her own authorship before a panel of 18, think about this, had to defend her own authorship before a panel of 18 prominent Bostonians, including John Hancock, who interrogated her to prove an enslaved woman could actually write poetry. Despite her fame, she died in poverty as a scullery maid. I'm not sure what scullery is. What's a scullery maid? Does anybody know? I don't. Say what? Kitchen maid. Yeah. So she died in poverty as a kitchen maid, and to this day, no one knows where she's buried. Phyllis Wheatley. Thomas Paine. That's a name I think probably people have heard about, but you might not know other than writing Common Sense. So he wrote Common Sense in 1776. It sold 500,000 copies. Keep in mind the population may have been in the 3 to 4 million range, so sold 500,000 copies. More than any book in American history up to that point, turning independence into an idea and a popular cause. He died with only 6 mourners at his funeral after being shunned by former allies for his religious views. His bones were later dug up, shipped to England, and lost entirely. He trained as a corset maker, apprentice in England before crossing the Atlantic at age 37, and started a very humble starting, but he helped ignite the revolution. During the French Revolution, which happened in 1799, help me, is that about right, 1799? So during the French Revolution, he was imprisoned in Paris under a death sentence and narrowly escaped execution. Future President James Monroe used his diplomatic standing to secure Paine's release from France. And then decades later, though estranged from most of his old allies, Paine urged Thomas Jefferson to seize the chance to buy the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon and offered the advice that helped inspire all of the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase. And that was a bad idea at the time. It was a bad idea, but Paine encouraged Jefferson to do that. And I think Indiana's part of the Louisiana Purchase. I think were we part of that? Anyway, no? Dave, no? We were Northwest Territory. Right, Indiana was Northwest Territory. Abigail Adams. She told John Adams famously, "Remember ladies." So she was the first suffragette, maybe, to really start pushing that idea. Her letters to John Adams helped shape his political thinking on everything from independence to governance. Arguably the most influential political advisor never to hold office. He kept, there's a book by David McCullough called John Adams, interestingly enough, and they made it into like a 6 or 8 part miniseries, and it's built from their letters correspondence. Remember, Adams was in France and England for decades, and she was left home alone. And they say both of their correspondence, and ultimately McCullough wrote the book called John Adams from that. It's a fantastic book. It's a 1,200-page book. It's a slow read. I would encourage you to watch the miniseries, which is absolutely fantastic. She managed the family farm and finances and investments so shrewdly that in the decades that John Adams was absent, she turned the modest estate into very significant wealth. She was an early believer in inoculation and had her children vaccinated against smallpox during an epidemic, which is now, it wiped out smallpox in the 20th century, I guess it would have been. She is here's trivia. She is one of only 2 women in American history to have been both a wife and a mother of a U.S. president. The other being, who's the other? Barbara Bush. So Abigail Adams' son, John Quincy Adams, was a president as well. I think he was number 4. That's an interesting story. Not Mom and Dad of the Year with John Quincy. He was put to the test. I think they sent him to Russia by himself at age 14 to sit in the Russian court. Not Mom and Dad of the Year. She was so outspoken about politics that she expected to be vilified and abused in the press, and she actually usually was. Patrick Henry, we've probably heard that name. We're not sure why we have, but it's because of Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, which brought Virginia to the Revolution, widely considered among the most consequential speeches in American history. A devout Anglican who grew increasingly evangelical, he believed religious liberty was inseparable from political freedom, so he bound those two together. So he cared for his wife at home after she developed severe mental illness, refusing to commit her to an era's brutal asylum system, which was radical at the time. That was easy. You send your wife to the asylum when she becomes demented, but he refused to do that. He's a self-taught farmer and storekeeper with little formal education. He reportedly passed the bar exam after only 6 weeks of studying legal law and legal precedent. His fierce opposition to the Constitution helped force the Bill of Rights into existence, so he refused to give support to its ratification until individual rights were guaranteed. And so there was a big controversy. If you assign individual rights, if you don't include it in the Constitution or what ultimately became the Bill of Rights, then it's not a right. So the drama was, do you list every single thing as an American's right in the Bill of Rights? Because you can't list everything because you don't know how things are going to go. And here we are 250 years later. Who would have thought about driving on the right-hand side of the road, having to show ID to vote? Like, who would have ever thought of those kind of things? So it was a big drama about, do you have to include all the rights, or do you just include the inalienable rights, the most important rights, assuming and understanding things will change over time? What do we know this guy from? Sam Adams. Beer, yeah, Sam Adams beer. Sam Adams, he organized the Sons of Liberty, which was a secret society. I think it was the Sons of Liberty that threw the tea over to the side of the Boston Tea Party. And oh, by the way, the Boston Tea Party was one of probably several dozen tea parties. They took place all over the country. There was this, it's like the ice bucket challenge, dumping the ice bucket over your head. It was the ice bucket challenge of its time, is to go into a harbor and throw British tea into whatever harbor. So St. Charles, Maryland, which is close to where I lived in Maryland, had its own Boston St. Charles Tea Party. He was a devout Puritan and strict Calvinist. He saw the revolution as a religious duty and believed God had chosen America as its model for this theory. Adams was a terrible businessman who nearly bankrupted his family and lost the family brewery. I'm going to come back to that in a second. His genius was exclusively political. He was a horrible businessman. I think he was a cousin of John Adams, not the brother, but the cousin of John Adams. And before becoming a revolutionary icon, he held a string of minor government posts, including tax collector, and was famously bad at actually collecting taxes. So he lost that job. He didn't actually run a brewery. He ran he was a malter. So he collected malt from farms and then sold it to breweries. So although he's famous for having a brewery, he never ran a brewery. He was a malter. Robert Morris. And oh, by the way, if you have questions, throw them out there. And I will say, I don't know. And then I'll look around the corner and ask Dave what he knows, because Dave's pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. So let's talk about the financial and diplomatic founders. Robert Morris. He was superintendent of finance, and he personally bankrolled the Continental Army. One of only 2 men to sign the Declaration of Independence, also the Articles of Confederation, and also the Constitution. So we think all these all these guys carried through the entire process. No, they didn't. There are very few guys that carried through the entire process. I think there are only 4, or did I say 2 earlier, that signed all the documents. But he's one of 4 that signed these big 3 documents. He was Episcopalian and of modest faith. One of the richest men in America, and he died penniless. This is a common theme. In 1806, after 3 years of debtor's prison, ruined by land speculation, also a common theme. A lot of these guys loaned or bartered their estates or signed guarantees to finance the revolution, and then the states wouldn't fess up to repay the debts. And so was one of the richest men in America and died penniless. Or he was orphaned at age 16 after his father was killed in a freak accident involving a misfiring cannon. Morse had almost no formal education, and he clerked his way up from nothing to something. He personally guaranteed, and this is what his problem, IOUs, known as Morris notes, that the government used to pay soldiers and buy supplies once continental currency became worthless. So if you're a collector, which I am, I don't own any, but they're still continental currency, and they're slips of paper about the size of a postcard. They're all hand-signed and all hand-numbered, and from all the various states. All the various states entered produced paper currency, and they're still out there for collectors out there. So after his fortune collapsed through this crazy land speculation, his friend George Washington visited him in debtor's prison, where he spent his final years and ultimately died. Haman Solomon. He brokered massive loans and donations to the Continental Congress, including funds that helped finance Washington's decisive victory at Yorktown, which was arguably the last and biggest final battle in Yorktown, Virginia, where Cornwallis, I believe, surrendered his sword to Washington, and Washington would not accept it. He made him surrender his sword to Hamilton, and that infuriated Cornwallis that he could not surrender his sword to Washington, but had to do it to a lieutenant colonel instead of a general. He was Jewish, and he founded Philadelphia's Mikhev Israel Synagogue, and he was one of the guys that fought for religious liberty that enshrined in the Bill of Rights. He was arrested twice as a spy by the British and sentenced to death, and he escaped by bribing a guard, and he fled to Philadelphia. So modern historians have found that Solomon's true role, rather than financing the revolution, he actually brokered loans from other people that he guaranteed. A much larger myth grew from his son's decade-long campaign to recover the money that Solomon supposedly gave to the Continental Army, but he didn't really give it. He actually brokered the donations. There's a monument in Chicago that shows Solomon and George Washington and Robert Morris clasping hands. It's just a tribute by private citizens of Illinois. I've never seen it, but next time I'm in Chicago, I'm going to look this up. So it's contested. There's a Star of David on the $1 bill. Know that? Everybody know that? So it's hotly contested whether he was the one that got the Star of David, whether in honor of him or whatever, on the $1 bill. And so it's a long surviving myth. No one knows whether it's true or not. Our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, arguably not as smart as James Wilson, but more politically astute. So he was named Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He co-authored the Federalist Papers and was a negotiator of the Treaty of Paris that ultimately ended the revolution. He purchased an enslaved teenager at auction and freed him immediately, and later became president of the Manumission Society of New York. So Washington's choice of John Jay over James Wilson for the role of Chief Justice was shaped, and Jay ultimately shaped how the Supreme Court worked. I mean, they had this Supreme Court, but there were no rules. Like, I don't know, like, what do we do? Do we vote? Is it a unanimous vote? Is it a popular, like, does the popular vote win? Like, nobody knew what it was. So John Jay was the real guy who really shaped that. So Jay's, I wasn't going to talk about this, but Jay's controversial. There was a treaty of 1794 with the British, which basically eliminated the need to have another revolution. The British were coming back in. They came back in 1812. That ultimately was the War of 1812 and ended in 1814. And that's a whole nother story. But we'll talk about the War of 1812. Nothing happened in 1812. I mean, the British came back in and they were taking sailors from the sea. But the war really ended in 1814, and 13 and 14 was where all the cool action started. But there was nearly a war. The British were coming back in 1794. And Jay signed a treaty that was very unpopular locally. I mean, they would have kicked our tails because the British were infinitely more powerful, and they knew what they were getting into in 1894 that they didn't know what they were getting into. Or I'm sorry, I said 1894, 1794. but the British really didn't know what they were getting into in the 1770s when the revolution started. So they burned him. Protesters burned Jay in effigy on the streets of Philadelphia and Boston for brokering that war. So we wanted to go to war, which probably we would have lost. Eldridge Gary, also known as Jerry, he signed the Declaration of Independence. He co-wrote the Bill of Rights and served as vice president. And I don't know, I think it may have been Monroe or Madison. Yet he had refused to sign the Constitution. In 1812, redistricting created a district so oddly shaped, the press drew it as a salamander, giving the birth gerrymandering, but he actually pronounced his name Gary with a hard G, not a soft G as like a J. As vice president, he was gravely ill in 1813, so that would have been Madison in 1813. He refused to give up his Senate chair to a rival senator who favored peace with Britain, a stubborn move that arguably protected Madison's war policy during the time. So let's talk about military figures. So Kosciuszko County up north, people know that. Kosciuszko was Polish. He was an engineer. He designed the fortifications at West Point and Saratoga that turned the tide of the revolution. He was a devout Catholic. In 1798, in his will, he left his entire American fortune to buy and free enslaved people, including some of Jefferson's own slaves, which Jefferson never acted upon. Kosciuszko arrived in Philadelphia and walked straight into Benjamin Franklin's shop, offering to sit for an engineering exam on the spot, even though no one in the Army knew the subject well enough to even grade it. He died, I think, in Savannah. I think Kosciuszko's buried in. People have anybody been to Savannah? Yes, been to Savannah. So it's designed around these squares in Savannah, and they would have big bells there and rings for fire, and they would get people to come out. And what they've now done is put fountains and monuments there. I'm pretty sure Kosciuszko is buried. He was killed outside of Savannah during the Revolution and is buried in one of those. His advice to fortify the hill overlooking Fort Ticonderoga was ignored, and the British leaders saved the high ground and the fort fell. So he was an engineer that knew what he was talking about. Back in Poland, when he went back, so I lied. He's not buried in Savannah. Back in Poland, he later he is buried in Savannah. Back in Poland, he later led his own uprising against the Russian occupation, and he limited his own serfs' labor obligations, and he was imprisoned by Catherine the Great for 2 years. So this guy got around. Okay, everybody's keeping score of your favorites, right? You get 2 votes. Everybody's keeping score. All right, great. So he defied the King of France to fight for American independence at age 19. His lobbying ultimately secured France's support for the American Revolution. He bought a ship using his own money to sail to America against the French king's demand or wishes, and Washington treated him as his adopted son. He was baptized with a comically long string of saints' names, jokingly in his memoirs, that he was baptized like a Spaniard to cover all of the bases in battle. He has like 7 saints' names as middle names. In 1785, he sent Washington several French hunting hounds, which were then bred with Washington's English foxhounds to help create the American foxhound breed that exists today. Congress made him only one of 6 foreign nationals ever to be granted U.S. citizenship, and that happened in 2002, after nearly 170 years after his death. He's buried in Paris with an American flag over his grave, and that flag is changed out every July 4th. And they shipped soil. They shipped soil from, I think it was Yorktown, to put over his grave in Paris. So he's buried under American soil. He did late in his life. So keep in mind, he was only 19 in the mid-1770s. So in the 1820s, he came back, very wealthy guy. He survived the French Revolution by hook and crook. I mean, they wanted him because he was an aristocrat, and he survived the French Revolution and basically dodging people who wanted to cut his head off. He came back to the United States, I think it was 1820s, and there were 24 states, and he did a tour of all the 24 existing states. And there are untold numbers of cities and counties in the United States named after the Marquis de Lafayette. Baron von Steuben. Would it be Steuben, Curtis? Steuben? So it's mispronounced sometimes Steuben. Okay. Baron von Steuben. Interesting guy. He claimed to have served as an officer under Frederick the Great in the Prussian army. But he came over, he transferred the Continental Army at Valley Forge into a professional fighting force. Franklin inflated his rank from captain to lieutenant general to impress Congress, and Steuben played along with the ruse. I wasn't going to do this, but he barely spoke English when he arrived, so he drilled his troops shouting orders in German and French. Donna told me not to tell this story. He shouted orders to his soldiers in German and French, and cursing in the one English word that he knew, which was goddamn. That's the only English word he knew. So he had a translator, but when he got angry, shouted out. Okay, an unproven anonymous accusation about his conduct had wrecked his reputation in Europe before he left. Part of why he was so eager to get to America is pretty well documented that he was either a private or a corporal and a ne'er-do-well in the Frederick the Great's army. He was not an officer, but he came over flexing his muscle and ultimately made general officer. But it was his discipline from being in the Prussian army that basically turned Valley Forge into a complete clown show, into a legitimate fighting force after Valley Forge outside of Philadelphia. Has anybody been to Valley Forge? Not much to see, is there, Eric? It's just you drive your car. It's just not much to see. But it was horrible. I mean, guys, one of the worst winters ever. No shoes, no food. They had built cabins that, to call them cabin is a gross overstatement. I'd rather spend time in the shed we have in back rather than the cabins that they had 5 or 6 guys sleeping in. He once observed that in Europe you tell a soldier, do this, and he obeys. But in America, you must first explain why. A line historians still quote to capture the difference between European and American military culture. So, Eric, do this, and you're going to say to me, but why? I'm like, because I told you so. Because I'm your dad, whatever. Nathaniel Greene. He was Washington's most trusted general. He liberated the entire South through brilliant guerrilla warfare. He lost every major battle, yet he won the campaign by exhausting the British into retreat. So a Pyrrhic victory, I don't know the source of it, but a Pyrrhic victory is when you win the battle and lose the war, which is what the British did in the South. They won every major battle, but they lost the war. A self-educated iron forger with a limp, he taught himself military strategy entirely from books. As a teenager, he reportedly snuck out of his bedroom window with his brother to attend a forbidden neighborhood dance, risking a whipping from their strict Quaker fathers. So he was born as a devout Quaker, and they expelled him from the Quaker religion because he attended a military parade. He was awarded by the state of Georgia, a massive rice plantation, massive. Tens of thousands of acres of this rice plantation, and I think he grew up in New Hampshire or Vermont. So he went down there he battled down there, but he went down there to live, really not knowing what he was getting into. But he was granted that after the war, and his child's tutor was Eli Whitney, who invented the cotton gin. John Witherspoon, so spiritual. John Witherspoon, he was a Revolutionary War minister. He was a devout Scottish Presbyterian. His Reformed theology taught him resisting tyranny was obedience to God, not rebellion against God. And keep in mind, the King of England was proclaiming that rebellion against the king was disobedient to God. George III called the revolution a Presbyterian rebellion because Witherspoon's sermons were so politically influential. Decades before signing the Declaration of Independence, Witherspoon was captured by government forces, British forces, during a Scottish uprising and imprisoned in British forces in Scotland, and imprisoned in a castle. and he and his fellow prisoners escaped by knotting bed sheets together and climbing down walls, which led to the development of the American film industry. I made the last part up, by the way. He personally added 300 of his own books to Princeton's library and modeled the school's curriculum after the University of Edinburgh, ultimately developing one of the largest libraries in the United States. His students went on to include, this is cool, his personal students went on to include 1 president, 1 vice president, 21 senators, 29 House members, and 12 governors, which is unmatched as an educator. Charlie Carroll, from Maryland, Catholic founder. The only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the wealthiest signer, and lived longest, surviving to age 95, lived in Maryland. His home, Don and I lived in Ellicott City, Maryland, which is basically between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, in, oddly, Carroll County, wouldn't you know? Yeah, he lived in Carroll County, outside Howard County, which is where I live. Used to be able to drive, when we first moved there in 1997, you could drive down the road and see this huge mansion off side. It looked very much like Montpelier or like Monticello, or, you know. But after we lived there, they closed the road. You don't condemn a road, but they closed it because everybody's driving down to see it. It's the only home that is still owned by relatives of a signer of the Declaration of Independence in Maryland, or anywhere in the country, but it's in Maryland. He was educated for 16 years in Jesuit schools in Europe, and his faith rose his fight for religious liberty. Okay, this is it. When asked if signing the Declaration endangered his fortune because he signed it Charles Carroll of Carrollton, a little ego there, he did that supposedly so that no one would misidentify him. Although he may have stated that, Carroll actually had been signing that way for many, many years before the Declaration of Independence, so there was a little ego involved there. Historians now believe that the adding of Carrollton is a myth, and he didn't really do that because it was done so much in advance of signing the Declaration of Independence. At age 91, so think about the times he was living in during the Revolutionary War period. So at age 91, he laid the cornerstone for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, symbolically linking the Revolution to the coming of age of the steam age. Though personally fond of Thomas Jefferson, Carroll thought him dangerously radical and warned Alexander Hamilton, remember, Jefferson and Hamilton were not buddies, warned Hamilton that Jefferson's philosophy risked plunging the young country into French-style chaos. Benjamin Rush, founder of the American Psychiatrist and a physician. He signed the Declaration of Independence, and he served as a Surgeon General, and he brokered the reconciliation between Adams and Jefferson that restored their friendship. So Adams and Jefferson co-wrote most of the documents that founded this country, but years later became bitter enemies and did not talk for decades, many decades. They both died on the same day, July 4th, 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So July 4th, 1826. They both died at the same time, and apart, but both of their last words were asking, does Jefferson survive me, and does Adams survive me? They were very interested. Abigail Adams was very instrumental in brokering the return to the friendship of Adams and Jefferson, as was Benjamin Rush. He was a Presbyterian. He believed religion was essential to any republic and argued education without faith produced learned monsters. He wrote the first American chemistry textbook and argued on scientific grounds that black people were intellectually equal to whites. And in 1773, that was unheard of. It was dangerous to say stuff like that. During Philadelphia's 1793 yellow fever epidemic, Rush treated up to 100 patients a day from his own home, bleeding many of them repeatedly. That was a thing. You basically get the bad humors out by bleeding them. Treatment now seen as medically unwise. Probably was the reason that George Washington died from bleeding. He'd been bled, past tense, many, many times, and probably is the reason that Washington died was from too many bleedings. Rush was not there, but it was probably on Rush's advice that they bleed the humors out of Washington. I think Washington had an infection and a fever, ultimately killed him from bleeding. His father-in-law was also a signer, Richard Stockton, and he was dragged from his bed by loyalists and imprisoned. This was his father, not Rush, but his father, his father-in-law. And Rush's connections helped secure Washington's intervention to get him freed. Last but not least, Sybil Ludington. She was 16 when she rode roughly 40 miles through night to muster her father's militia after the British burned Danbury, Connecticut, a ride that was twice as long as Paul Revere's. Gosh, Ludington might even be more difficult to come up with a poem for, so I'm not even going to suggest that. The earliest known written account of her ride wasn't recorded until 1854, nearly 80 years after the fact, in a letter from her nephew campaigning to have her included in a war memorial. And the Daughters of the American Revolution have publicly stated that evidence isn't strong enough to confirm that the ride actually happened, as even a local chapter continues to honor her every year. But there's a lot of folklore about a 16-year-old. There were three of them, William Dawes, Revere, and Ludington. And Revere, because his name rhymes with career and steer and here, is the one that we remember. Any questions? Any thoughts? Oh, Curtis, no, not you. Yeah.
Can I offer one additional military figure?
Please.
Francis Marion.
Mm-hmm. Swamp Rat.
The Swamp Rat, exactly. So, before the Revolution, he served in British militias. Obviously, when the Revolution started, he joined the colonists. He served in South Carolina. The officer in charge of him didn't necessarily know what to do with him. So he said, go do something. He basically is the founder of the Special Forces. So he got a lot of woodsmen together, and they did raids against the British in South Carolina. He was very disciplined. He told his men, we are not going to burn any Tory homes.
I didn't know that.
We are not going to do that. There were two British officers who were specifically tasked with tracking him down and killing him. He had a bounty on his head, significant bounty on his head. Ultimately, the fact that he wasn't burning homes and the British were burning homes of suspected supporters that were supporting his efforts caused the Carolina population to rally behind him significantly. He lived in the swamp. That's where he earned his name. The British gave him the Swamp Fox because they just couldn't track him.
Relentless, yeah.
And they admitted to the fact that they couldn't track him down. Near the end of the war, there was a kind of an arrangement where if the British were controlling certain areas, that they would be able to keep that. And so he methodically went, at the end of the war, methodically with his men, took down every single British fort that was in existence in his area. We're talking about like a dozen or so. And oftentimes they had come up with surprising engineering solutions to taking out a fort. Like, for example, one time they built a giant tower overnight so that they could be above the walls of the fort to fire down. When the British realized what had happened, they surrendered. They said, we're done. So that would be my offering.
What caused the rift between Jefferson and Adams?
So Adams was a Federalist. Help me out here. Adams was, along with Hamilton, was a Federalist, and Jefferson was an anti-Federalist. And there was a big piece of it about started in the National Bank of America. That's as far as I can go. Anybody can help me on that? What was the rift between Jefferson and Adams? It was the Federalist Papers and being a Federalist. I'll let you know tomorrow. I won't be at church tomorrow. I'll let you know a week from tomorrow. I'll look into that a little further. Yeah, Eric.
Been part of it, the Federalist versus states' rights or
Oh, thank.
How long is the right?
Strong federal government versus states' rights.
How strong you want federal government to be versus individual?
Thank you.
county
Thanks, Eric.
states'
Yeah,
rights.
you're right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And back to the other one, Francis Marion, the movie The Patriot,
Uh-huh.
with Mel Gibson,
Mm-hmm.
is modeled a lot after,
Right. Francis Marion. Yeah.
after his
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So now we're going to vote. Can somebody be a scribe for the votes? And we'll go around until everybody exhausts their 2 votes. So I'm going to nominate mine, and then we'll ask somebody else to nominate yours. I'm going to nominate an underdog here, James Wilson.
Oh, that was mine.
Well, good. Okay. Well, you get 2 votes. You get 2 votes. So, Paul, would you mind helping you keep track of who wins, or who wants to volunteer to help us keep? Thanks. James Wilson. So raise your hand if James Wilson is one of your 2. We got 2 votes for James Wilson. Okay, somebody else nominate one of their 2.
I'd
Tina.
nominate Witherspoon, the educator.
John Witherspoon.
Being a fellow teacher,
Yeah.
he had a pretty good amount of influence.
Okay, so that's my second one too. So all in favor of John Witherspoon. Let's hold on, keep your hands up. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got 12 votes for Witherspoon. Okay, somebody else, nominate yours.
Abigail Adams.
Abigail Adams, yeah. Okay,
Did they say Abigail Adams?
Abigail Adams. So put your hand in and keep your hand in the air if Abigail Adams is yours. Vote early and vote often. Not true. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay? You want to nominate somebody?
I did, I was Abigail.
Oh, you were-
And Witherspoon, but I kind of like this guy too. Yes.
Okay, but you, 2 votes. So, okay, Marquis de Lafayette. Who votes for Marquis de Lafayette? So keep your hands in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for Lafayette. I thought he was going to win it, by the way.
I want to nominate Thaddeus
Kosciuszko? The Pole. Thaddeus Kosciuszko. So, Paul, I assume because you nominated him, your hand's in the air.
Yes.
Okay, 1, 2. Okay, we got 3 for Kosciuszko. Curtis, anybody you want to nominate? You-
Patrick Henry.
Patrick Henry.
Yeah.
Okay, hand in the air for Patrick Henry. We got 1, 2 for Patrick Henry. All right, who else? Who's not you?
Phyllis
Pete.
Wheatley.
Wheatley, Phyllis Wheatley. Okay, get your hands in the air.
Devoted Christian.
Your hands in the air for Phyllis Wheatley. Only 1, 2, 3. We got 3 in the air. 3 votes for Phyllis Wheatley. Eric.
Roger Sherman,
Fletcher Sherman.
no, Roger Sherman.
Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman. Hand in the air. Right? Roger Sherman. 2. He's the only one that signed all the documents, if I'm correct.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
We got 2 for Roger Sherman. All right, somebody nominate somebody else.
Sybil Ludington.
Sybil Luddington, the 16-year-old, who, unfortunately, Luddington doesn't rhyme with much, so that's too bad. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Sybil Luddington.
To comment on her,
Yeah,
she was on one of the bicentennial
the stamps.
stamps.
She was, yeah.
That was a whole series
Uh-huh.
back in 75 and 76.
6, yep, she was. So I'd made the statement that no coins, no stamps, no currency. The stamps I have to drop because there were a lot of these people that were on stamps. Benjamin Rush was on stamps at the same time. So, any other nominations?
King Solomon.
Solomon, the Jew.
Yeah.
He was the only Jew that signed the Declaration of Independence. What a gutsy thing. And I think it might have been in many states illegal to be Jewish at the time. As in many states, it was illegal to be Catholic as well. So, Solomon, hand in the air for Solomon. We got 1 vote for Solomon. Anybody else that we want to nominate before we tally this up? Any other nominate? Has everybody exhausted their 2 votes? Steve. George Mason. We got a vote for George Mason. Hands in the air, Steve. We got 1 vote for George Mason. George Mason.
Stand your ground, dear.
Yeah.
You're responsible for the 10 Commandments being there.
There you go.
Damn.
An interesting thing about James Wilson, before we go on, James Wilson was responsible for coming up with the term the United States of America as opposed to these United States of America, which seems minor, but if you think about it, it's a big deal. The United States of America as opposed to these United States of America, which would have been a federalist idea to bring everything together and not put the power with the states. Okay, any other nominations before we tell it?
Robert Morris.
Do we have Robert Morris already? No, we had Mason was the other one. Robert Morris, hand in the air for Robert Morris. Bobby Morris. We got one vote for
What is
Robert
staying
Morris.
firm here?
Anybody else? Okay, Paula, can you tell us who's the big winner here?
Abigail Adams was 17,
Totally worthy.
and, let me make sure, Witherspoon with 12.
Okay. So Abigail Adams is, I'd call that a landslide. I think it was a landslide.
She did pretty good.
Any other comments? PK, would you mind closing this session out with a prayer? Oh, Eric, a comment?
Yeah, one comment about 2 weeks ago. It was kind of late at night. I was channel surfing and happened to turn into C-SPAN, and which I seldom watch, but it was.
And it went to sleep instantly?
No, it was so interesting. I stayed awake for a change. But it was about the National Archives, and the current director, at least current at the time it was filmed, he had been the National Archives director for 30-some years. And one of the things that caught my attention relative to the Bill of Rights, he said there's always been some confusion whether there was 10 or 12 amendments as to the Bill of Rights. He said the first two that was listed did not get approved. They got carved off, tabled. The others moved up in sequence. Hence, the numbering system versus the original versus what it ended up is different. So he said, what everybody knows now is the Second Amendment would have been number 4 because by parking the other two. The other two amendments, one had to do with representation again,
Okay.
revisiting that topic. He said it's good that it was not approved because we would have had thousands of representatives in Congress instead of the number that we have nowadays.
Huh, did not know that.
So, and the second one was relative to government employee compensation, salaries and whatever for the various positions, and nobody could ever agree on that. So they
I'd never heard that.
parked that out on the side, and hence it became the 12 or the 10 instead of the 12.
Fascinating, never heard that. Thank you.
I'd never heard of it either until
Thank you.
2 weeks ago.
Thank you, thanks. Anything else? Yes,
I was gonna ask, did you say the Star of David was on the dollar bill?
the $1 bill. It was the original, the original
I'm
dollar
looking
bill that
for
came
it.
out. Yeah,
It's not.
yeah, the original one.
She said probably the original.
All right, here's trivia. One thing before we go to PK for prayer. Who's the only woman that has ever been on currency? Say again?
Because she was on.
Oh, currency, paper currency. Currency.
Is it old and not in circulation?
Say again? No. But thanks for saying that, though, Keith. Martha Washington. So there was a $1 bill that was produced during the Civil War. And the bill's called the Martha Washington. Go figure.
Have one?
Huh?
Do you have one?
I have, yeah.
I want to see one.
I'll bring one in.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. It's Martha Washington, yeah.
On a side note, I make Martha Washington candies every year.
What is a Martha Washington
So it
candy?
is basically powdered sugar, butter, cream, dipped in chocolate. You can put nuts in it, things like that.
And why is it called a Martha Washington
I
candy?
think she made them years ago. So it's in my husband's family history. They've been making them for years. So I give those a lot to the neighbors. Yeah. So
Delicious.
I'm John and Mary Ann.
Yeah.
Should bring them in next.
Right.
All right, let's close this session out.
Let's stay in.
Say again?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Take a little more time for food. I think it's letting up a little bit, but it was pouring just a minute ago, so
And
cautious.
thanks to everyone who helped with breakfast.
Yes.
And I
Lots
made
of
more
flood
coffee.
warnings.
If you went to get coffee and it was empty, I made more.
Be safe on your travels, and hope to see you tomorrow for, it is supposed to be a great day. So we are going to have our baptisms outside, and we are going to have our membership inside, and you're going to get another surprise tomorrow, so I hope you will be here in worship. So, will you pray with me? Lord Jesus, thank you for this chance to gather together, just to learn more about who we are and where we've come from, and the people that had impacts on our lives that we may not have even known about. And we thank you for this chance that we could just fellowship, because that's what you call us to. You call us to learn and to fellowship and to encourage one another. And so we thank you for this time. Thank you for everybody who put in the time for food and took care of everything else. And we just pray for your peace today as we leave this place, and we ask that you would go with us in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. One other note. So in the July session, John mentioned that he was going to get the movie The Great Awakening. So that's going to be aired here on August 29th, if you would like to come see that movie, The Great Awakening. And then the third and final episode of this is the second Saturday in September, second Saturday of September, where John's going to close down the 250th anniversary. And if you were celebration, if you were here last time, you know nobody likes a party like Ben Pauley likes a party. So July of 1776 was simply the start, and the whole revolution went on for decades. So let's keep the party going.